Hello everybody. As part of the introduction to Education 402, I wanted to show you this huge graphic that I made for the spring semester 2020. And this is a timeline of the teacher wars. Basically a 12-foot long giant timeline separated into different eras. The eras we'll be working through as we read through the teacher wars. So basically the purpose of this huge timeline is just to give you a context for everything that we'll be reading in the book. So this is the whole book, starting from what's called the Common School era, where you have people like Catherine Beecher, Susan B. Anthony. You'll notice some of our students from the spring penciled in some other important names. Belva Lockwood, Horace Mann. So this is the foundation of public education in the United States. And as we look in on some of these, you'll also notice that there are different colors on this. And so we're going to use 5 different categories of colors, including orange, which is for people. So this is why you have the color orange next to some of these individuals. And as we move forward from the Common School era, early 1800s, to the Progressive era, bringing us around 1900, a fascinating period where you have the struggle with immigration, African American experience. There's an image of W.B. Du Bois. You have women gaining positions of power, such as Ella Flagg Young. Again, the color orange. You've got red, the color red, and the color red represents controversies where you had American Federation of Labor partnering with early teacher unions. Maggie Haley, another huge figure. And another figure we'll read about, Mary McDowell. So, and here's Fisk University, an early African-American historically black college outside of Nashville, which was controversial in that sense, simply because it was a historically black college. And also has the color blue, which is a color that represents events. So we've got orange for people, red for controversies, blue for events. And so this progressive era was fascinating. You had labor unions, you had socialist parties, communist parties. You had a fascinating period of the struggle for what it meant to have a public education system. And then that struggle continues into the civil rights era, where we have Brown versus Board of Education, landmark case. You see the colors red and blue, events and controversies. Brown versus Board, we have to provide equal access to education for all people. And again, reminding us all, that's how recent that was, right? I mean, we're talking about fairly recent. We've also got another controversy, which is also a policy. A lot of alarm bells went up when the Russians launched Sputnik, essentially beating the United States into space. And so you have the National Defense Education Act, which was a method that pumped lots of money into science and math and language instruction in the 1950s. Next to that is the color green, which represents policy, and that's LBJ with one of his teachers who had founded the Elementary and Secondary Education Act during that period. During this tumultuous civil rights period, we've got the struggle for better schools, we've got lots of strikes happening, we've got, again, class and racial tension, school integration, major theme. We've got Al Shanker, who was the first president of the American Federation of Teachers, who we see the color orange, but we also see events. So that's a major event. You have the founding of this what became a massive organization. I put a silly image of a PC in there because this is when we get into more modern periods, the school reform era, kind of the time that I think about when I was transitioning personally from high school to college, and the early 80s. What you had were policies and ideas that were centered around this latest version of school reform, which was around accountability, a standards movement. President Reagan, his policy was a nation at risk. Listen, we're behind the Russians still. We need to fast forward, and we need new policies. So a lot of this had to do with also the shift in funds away from public education, which you saw a lot during the conservative Reagan years, and more influence from private entities about what a public school system should be. So a lot of controversy there. So around a nation at risk, you see the color red for controversy, as well as green policy and people. And then you have, of course, bilingual education kicking off really through the 70s and into the 80s, and became a political hotbed. So school reform era, and then the current era where we have accountability, No Child Left Behind, which I can't believe is nearly 20 years old at this point. And then, so of course controversial, because all education policy ultimately becomes controversial. And what we'll read about in Teacher Wars is this concept of Teach for America. Again, more of a private movement on what had always been a public entity, a public system that is, in this case, public education. And so you've got the broad sweep here of decades and decades and centuries of influences on public education. And again, this is a pictorial input chart, just simply to contextualize the whole thing for you. This is what we will read about in the Teacher Wars. People, events, policy, controversies, and again, the role of public education. That's one of the colors that we'll deal with. We didn't really see it up here so much. It's going to be like a purplish color. And we will be organizing our thinking around this book, around those 5 themes. And so you're seeing this early in the course as a kind of introduction, and that's simply what it's meant to be. I'll see you online.